be recorded for archival purposes and as a resource for members of the public to access. So you may choose to switch off your cameras or change your username at any point in time during this talk. And yeah, lastly, also during the Q&A segment at the end, you can either type your questions in the chat box or use your microphone to field your questions to the two speakers. And also to facilitate the Q&A, if you can indicate who your question is for, that would be also very much appreciated. So yeah, I'll pass the time over to Stephen, and yeah, thank you everyone once again for joining us this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I have a PowerPoint presentation, and what I'll do now is to share my screen, and then we can start. So if you can all hear me, then I will proceed. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Linda, for your introduction. And I want to thank you also for inviting me to give this talk in conjunction with a very meaningful exhibition staged by Boedi Widjaja. What I'm trying to do actually with my talk is that I'm actually trying to harmonize my talk with Boedi's exhibition by addressing some of the main themes that he's covering. In fact, actually, of course, the title of his exhibition is Kang Ouw, right, which is actually the Hokkien pronunciation of Jianghu. And by the way, I think that's a very interesting use of the word Jianghu, Hokkien pronunciation. And perhaps Boedi can explain later why he chooses to use Kang Ouw rather than Jianghu. Perhaps there are other deeper implications and meanings that we are not aware of, and Boedi can tell us. So I will address Jianghu as well as the other theme, Wuxia, which Boedi also refers to. And I think it's clear actually by, if you have watched his exhibition, I think it's clear that he's referring to Wuxia films because he makes use of certain film images and very iconic images of heroic figures. For example, the one-armed swordsman. And later in my talk, I will show a clip from the one-armed swordsman, as well as a clip of Dragon Inn, to which Boedi also alludes to. These images are a part of his work, a part of the exhibition, and I will talk about the origins of these two terms, the Jianghu and the Wuxia, and specifically the Wuxia film, and to see how they're interconnected or are combined or added together. This is, of course, the meaning of the plus sign in the title of my talk, Jianghu and Wuxia. But before I start, I want to just say something about myself. I think Linda has mentioned that I'm currently a senior research fellow at the Wee School of Communication and Information in Nanyang Technological University. Actually, prior to this, I was a professor, an associate professor at the school where I was teaching film courses. But I just want to draw your attention to my two books, essentially on the Wuxia film. And the first book is this one here, Chinese Martial Arts Cinema. Actually, there's this other book, which is in fact an expanded edition, a second edition. This edition, the first edition, was published in 2009 by Edinburgh University Press, and this second edition appeared in 2016 with an expanded chapter, a chapter that updates the the information of the Wuxia film development up to that point in time, around 2015, 2016. And my other book is this one. In fact, this is my most recent book, Chinese Martial Arts, Film, and the Philosophy of Action. And this was published last year. Now, I know I'm plugging my own books here, but I do want the viewers to know where I am coming from. And I hope to show with the display of my books here that I'm essentially a film scholar, or a historian, if you like, and that my expertise lies basically in studying the Chinese wuxia film, this whole genre in the Chinese cinema. And by Chinese cinema, I also include the Hong Kong and the Taiwan cinemas. And I want to emphasize that my expertise lies in this Chinese genre. I do not claim to be an expert in the whole martial arts genre, including Japanese martial arts film, or Korean martial arts film, or Malaysian martial arts film, or Indonesian martial arts film, and so on. So I'm essentially just a student of the Chinese martial arts film and its historical development. Otherwise, I also cannot claim that I am an expert in the martial arts itself. I know there's a field called martial arts studies, but that is not where I'm coming from. So to reiterate, I'm just a film scholar, and my interest in Wuxia or Jianghu comes essentially from my having watched all these Wuxia films produced back in the 1960s when I was growing up as a boy, particularly the Shaw Brothers Wuxia films produced from the mid-1960s onwards. I've loved these films since that time, and I continue to be very fond of these classics. And I still love the genre today. I still love modern wuxia films produced in either in the Hong Kong cinema or in the mainland Chinese cinema. But my interest in the topic is from a more academic and perhaps a philosophical interest that I'm trying to develop as well, as you can see in my book, this second book here on Chinese martial arts film and the philosophy of action. So to begin, I want to go straight to the term Jianghu and briefly explain the origins of this word. I think most people here have some idea already of what it is or what it means. But where does the word originate from? And that is a very interesting question. I don't think anybody really knows for sure, but it has probably social and cultural origins stretching back a long time, maybe 2,000 years, maybe 3,000 years. Historians suggest that it is a word that came from social development in Chinese history. And basically it refers to an abode, a place of residence where people go and live. But the residents are not ordinary people like you or I. They are xia, which is the Chinese word for, you can say a warrior or a knight or a fighter, whatever. They all basically mean, I think, essentially the same thing. The late Chinese historian Qian Mu said that Jianghu is one of 4 divisions of Chinese society, or 4 types of places where people congregate and live since the establishment of the imperial system, that is essentially from the Qin dynasty onwards. And they are the city, 城市, the village, 乡镇, mountain forest, 山林, and then there is Jianghu. I think we all know who resides in the city and in the village. So actually, I don't want to spend too much time talking about these 2 places. It is the Shanlin and the Jianghu that are of real interest to us. For Qian Mu, the Shanlin and the Jianghu are very close together. They are closely bound together. And I've just explained that it is the Xia who live in the Jianghu. So they also live in the Shanlin. And I think it is of interest for us to know of another term that is associated here with Shanlin, and that is the Wulin. We often hear this word used in the movies, the Wulin, meaning the martial forest. And since it is part of the Shanlin, it is also a part of the Jianghu. Now, the difference between the Jianghu and all the other parts of society, according to Qian Mu, is that the Jianghu is mobile. It is always on the move, and therefore it is impermanent. While the other three, the city, the village, the Shanlin, are static. They are immobile, and therefore permanent. And by the way, this also includes the Wulin. So the Wulin is thought of as a bit different from Jianghu in that it is not mobile. It is a permanent place. And I think this is a crucial difference. And so to define Jianghu, it means literally rivers and lakes, an abstract, indeterminate place. The residents are not ordinary people. It is impermanent. The place is impermanent, a place where people just come and go. The people, of course, are the Xia. And another term for the Xia is the Yu Xia, which means wandering Xia or wandering night. Or in fact, if we can refer back to a well-established term in Western medieval history, the term is the knight errant, which means essentially a wandering knight, a knight, who rides on his horse and, goes everywhere around the countryside, around, well, even the whole world, So, he becomes a knight errant. The Yu Xia in Chinese is the equivalent of the knight errant. Now, I want to look at the origins of the word Wuxia. The word is said to be of Japanese origin, and it was in common usage from, well, I would say from the turn of the 20th century onwards, the early 20th century, that is, or perhaps at the turn between the 19th and the 20th centuries. And it refers to a Japanese genre of adventure stories featuring chivalric and brave heroes. And the Japanese pronunciation of the term is bukyo. It is interesting to note that this word, which was current in Japan at that Hello, can you all hear me? Because I think there was an interruption.
Yeah, you're back on.
Okay,
I think,
okay, good.
There was
so as I was saying, China was heavily influenced at the time by Japanese culture, and students and intellectuals went to Japan to study. Just as today they might go to Western countries to study and live there, to maybe bask in Western culture and lifestyles. Well, in the early 20th century, they went to Japan. And Japan was seen as more modern and advanced than China was at the time. These intellectuals were keen at that time to foster a sense of militaristic and heroic culture among Chinese youth, so that China could extricate itself from its weakness. At that time, China was known as the sick man of Asia. So, to foster militarism in order to make China strong again, the words Wu and Xia helped to foster this idea, and the whole culture of militarism, including heroes, bravery, values like bravery, courage, strength, all those things, then help to bring about this whole Wuxia culture into China. But it has to be said that both the words Wu and Xia are actually long established words in Chinese history and culture. although they lost their currency over time as China grew increasingly weak, over the dynastic periods and so on. And it was Japan that revived the terms Wu and Xia in the Chinese mind. The combined term today, this word Wuxia, which simply means a militaristic hero or perhaps martial chivalry, literally speaking, is widely accepted today as part of Chinese culture and Chinese tradition. Wuxia today is used to refer actually to the cinematic genre, I believe, the Wuxia film. And conversely, in Japan, which supposedly originated the term, Wuxia is not used much today, at least to refer to the equivalent genre of Wuxia, which is the samurai film. In fact, the Japanese have their own term for the samurai film, which is Jidaigeki. And Jidaigeki essentially just means a period film or historical film. Or they use another term, chanbara, which is a word that resembles the sounds of swords, clashing together, clanging together, chan, 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 chanbara, and that's how the word came about. It should be noted that the Xia is a real historical figure. It is not a figment of the imagination. So the Xia, he or she, actually the Xia is free of gender here, doesn't exist entirely in myth, although it has passed into myth. And it was recorded in the grand historian Sima Qian, who was the historian of the Han Dynasty, in his book Shi Ji, or Records of the Grand Historian. And there, in one of the chapters written by Sima Qian, the biographies of Yu Xia, it is stated that the Xia, although not always occupied in legitimate occupations or in doing good, nevertheless, their word can be trusted. Their deeds always produce outcomes. They keep their promises and they are fearless, which means that they do not fear death. And this is the image of the Xia, or in fact, part of their philosophy that has been passed on through 2,000 years, I would say. Actually, I always like to point out that Wuxia or Xia has been in existence for over 2,000 years, but in the cinema, it has been in existence for only, well, I would say 94 years, because the Wuxia genre emerged in Chinese cinema basically in 1928. That was the year when the film Burning of the Red Lotus Temple was released, and it became so popular that the production company produced a whole series of this Burning of the Red Lotus Temple film. And other production companies then climb into the bandwagon and they produced the whole, their own series with the word burning in their films, in the titles. And it became, and that was how Wuxia film emerged. Now, I will just sum up the combination here between Jianghu and Wuxia by drawing some conclusions here. Jianghu is the social world where the Wuxia or Yuxia exists. It signifies a highly mobile place in which the Yuxia wanders. And it has its own code of behavior and ethics. And the cinematic genre of Wuxia describes and reflects the society of Jianghu. And I want to actually show my first clip here from the one-armed swordsman to further illustrate the essence of what I've been talking about, this entangled connection between Jianghu and Wuxia. And so this clip is from, of course, the classic Shaw Brothers production released in 1967. This was one of the first films that sparked off the new Wuxia wave, which began actually from around the mid-60s onwards. And it was one of those films that we had to go and see, when we were growing up. I was a kid then, because of word of mouth, and it was so popular that you had to go and see it, because otherwise if you didn't see it, you were just a fool. And I can tell you that ever since then, it has stayed on my mind ever since. The characteristics of this film can be said to be representative of most Wuxia films. You see, for example, the swordsman here, the one-armed swordsman that is, possessing incredible, almost supernatural skills in fighting with the sword, and he only has one arm in this case. And then the other thing is that you also see the strongly mythical atmosphere or aura of the action in the setting. The setting here is important, and the setting, most of it is actually a roadside inn. And I believe you can actually take this as a symbol of the Jianghu. I will play this.
Oh, 是个一只手的残废呀。
小子，看你手拿金刀，想必也是齐如风的徒弟了。
不过你只是一只手，这把金刀怎么使啊？我看还是把刀交出来，像咱们弟兄每人磕3个响头，大爷我就饶你这条小命。你不交出来，那我自己动手了。
伙计，拿酒来。伙计走了，要酒我来拿给你。再是纠缠不清，可别怪我手下无情。
上！
So that's fantastic stuff. I'm sure you all agree. From the clip, we see the one-armed swordsman in action, of course. He represents the prototypical Wuxia hero, although in fact he's unique, of course, in having only one arm. You can see that the action is supernatural or fantastic, and it can only happen inside a special world or place. This is, of course, the Jianghu. And as I said, the inn itself is a representation of this fantastic world, this extraordinary world. The Wuxia and the Jianghu are entangled together. They are inseparable. Now, next, I want to show another clip, and this one is from King Ouw's Dragon Inn, also released in 1967. And again, this was another Wuxia film that was strongly impressive on my boyhood imagination. Actually, in many ways, I think it was even more impressive because it seemed to me that King Ouw, the director, was a much more accomplished Wuxia action filmmaker, accomplished because he was very good in staging action, but at the same time, he was also very good in, evoking the Jianghu, the world of the Jianghu. So I will play the clip now.
客官，我们这儿没房了。
我不是住店的。
那您是？
你们吴掌柜的在家吗？
哦，掌柜的下山办货去了。
哦，什么时候回来？
不大清楚。我看呐，您还是过2天再来吧。
不，我等他。
啊？我看您呐，还是快走吧。
哦，为什么？
因为
他是这么回事儿。客官，这几天地面上不大太平，您
是不是达子兵要来捣乱呢？
是，
不要紧，我不怕他们。
啊？
怎么不玩了？
再说我们的客房都住满了，您还是……
刚才那伙计都告诉我了，我哪儿都能凑合。
您
给我来碗羊肉汤面，4两白干。
您
1
碗羊肉汤面，4两白干。
哦。伙计啊， 我也要碗羊肉面。
哦，
哎，我要那位桌上的那一碗。
啊，
那一碗。这怎么？
哦，客官，我再给您拿碗热的去啊。
站住！我要那一碗。听明白了没有？
明白是明白，可是这
让那位先吃。
谢谢您。
拿去。请。哎，伙计，你别这儿愣着，进去瞧瞧我那酒烫好了没有。
哦。
So 2 points I want to make about this scene. One is the image of the drifting swordsman, the Wuxia. We see him walking in the distance out in the open, in the beginning of the scene. And it is as if he's wandering or drifting, out in the world. The world is his oyster, so to speak. Then he arrives at the inn, which brings me to the next point, and that is the action set inside the inn. Again, it's very fantastic kind of action, very supernatural. And as in the one-armed swordsman, the inn represents the more focused world of the Jianghu, where there's the struggle between good and evil. It comes into a direct kind of confrontation here. And much of the action in the film, actually, for those of you who have seen the film, I think you all probably know it, that much of the action is actually located inside this inn. And I think it would be true to say that actually the Dragon Inn, the inn itself, is the world of the Jianghu. So finally, since we are running close to time here, I would just like to finish my presentation by making some last remarks about the philosophy or about principles of Jianghu and Wuxia. And first on the word Wu, the first principle of Wu is, 止戈为武. The way of being martial is to stop the dagger. And this principle is taken from the word itself. The word itself is actually made up of 止, meaning to stop, and ge, which means dagger, which is a tool of violence, right? So the word, the inherent meaning of the word is actually to stop violence. And this is the defensive principle of martial arts, which is, of course, to practice martial arts in order to stop violence. At least that is the, the first principle for any student of martial arts, I would hope. And I have to say that this gives rise to a fundamental paradox of martial arts film. Its appeal lies in the choreography of violence. The choreography of violence is actually quite beautiful to look at. It's very exciting to watch, but the inherent principle of Wu is opposed to violence. So what really is the moral of Wuxia film? Is there any moral, you might ask? And these are questions that are, relating to philosophy. I'm afraid it's too big a subject for us to talk about here. And I suppose I can suggest for anybody who's interested in deeper questions of philosophy of Wuxia and martial arts, please buy a copy of my book, the book that I showed you just now, Chinese Martial Arts Film and the Philosophy of Action. Now, the thing to note is that in the cinema, all the violence that occurs takes place within the sphere or atmosphere of the Jianghu. Violence takes on the ethical qualities of the knights or the xia, and this involves factors like skill, bravery, courage, fearlessness, that is, no fear of death, the honor of fighting according to certain codes. You can't stab people in the back, for example. if you don't show all these factors, that is, if you are a coward, you are dishonorable and treacherous, and above all, you show poor skill as a fighter, then you will just be lying dead in the Jianghu. Or, if you're not dead, then you are lying down horizontal. The winner is the one who is standing up, is vertical. The vertical and the horizontal is the law of the Jianghu, you might say. And by the way, this is actually a line taken from Wong Kar-wai's The Grand Master, and I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with that film. Lastly, the defensive principle of Wu is actually amplified by this passage from one of my favorite Chinese philosophers, Zhuangzi, in the chapter Discourse on Swords, Shuo Jian. In the text, Zhuangzi is acknowledged to be a great swordsman. The way he uses his sword, he cuts down one man every 10 steps and pushes forward for 1,000 leagues. This is actually a very famous saying from Zhuangzi, and it was actually quoted by the poet Li Bai in his poem Xia Ke Xing, or in English, Ode to Gallantry. And I note that Boedi has actually referred to this poem. However, the key passage that I want to draw your attention to is this one here, and I quote from the Zhuangzi: "One who wields a sword reveals his emptiness to his opponent, gives him an advantageous opening, makes his move after him, arrives before he does." And in this part of the slide, I include the original Chinese words there for anybody who knows Chinese. You see this principle at work in a lot of wuxia movies, but also in Japanese samurai movies. The Japanese philosophy, the martial philosophy, Bushido, is actually very much influenced by it. And the Japanese samurai films show this principle much better than anything I've seen in Chinese wuxia movies, I think. Because they're actually very good in showing the idea of emptiness, illustrating the principle that the swordsman must learn discipline when facing the enemy or an opponent. He must stay calm. This is the essence of emptiness. His mind must be free of any emotion, because if your mind is filled with hatred, then you might be compelled to do something rash, and you make the first move, you want to kill your opponent. Well, that would be a mistake. What you should do is to stay calm, empty your mind, and let your opponent make the first move. And when he does, you should then strike before he strikes you. So to conclude, we have been examining the terms Jianghu and Wuxia, and I want to say here that there are other key terms that we have actually no time to discuss, such as Kung Fu. This is another term that is key to understanding the whole martial arts genre. It is closely related both to Wuxia and Jianghu, but we don't really have time today to talk about Kung Fu or to focus on it. But perhaps we can, discuss it some other time, or perhaps we can talk about it briefly in the Q&A if anyone is interested. The other point is that wuxia films are effectively set in the Jianghu, and I want to make the sub point here, that is the Jianghu operates today not just in wuxia films, but also in gangster action films. In fact, there was a gangster action movie that was released some years ago that was actually entitled Jianghu. So we have looked at some principles or philosophy of wuxia and Jianghu, but again, we do not have time to fully discuss the philosophy of these topics. This is an immense area. Far too complex for us to, just to, talk briefly about it, but perhaps on another occasion. So I will end my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Teo, for mapping out the development principles and philosophies of Wuxia, as you mentioned, and really unpacking, to some extent, the terminologies of Jianghu and Wuxia. I'll now pass the time over to Boedi, who will be sharing on his work, Kang Ouw that's currently shown at the Esplanade Tunnel. I'll just give a short intro to Boedi before he starts. So he's an artist who was born in Indonesia and moved to Singapore at a young age. And his works are very much fueled by this first-hand experience of migration as a child. And his works are often process-based and very conceptually charged, and unfolds across a variety of mediums, including drawings, installation, video, and sound. So without further ado, I'll let Boedi tell you more from his perspective about Kang Ouw and his personal interest in Wuxia. Give it a moment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Dr. Teo, for such an exciting and insightful presentation. I really started my research into Jianghu and Wuxia proper through your book. Hence, it is such a pleasure and honor to have you here to share with us your knowledge and your research into this topic. I find it interesting to observe my personal changing relationship with Wuxia and Jianghu. I was exposed to the film genre when I was around 6 to 7 years old, before I migrated to Singapore. But I wasn't immediately drawn to it. In fact, I can still vaguely recall my slight annoyance at my parents for binge watching these films into the night. At the time, I didn't understand a single word in the films, and they all sounded like this irritating and awful noise to me when I really wanted to sleep. I only started to enjoy Wuxia films and the TV series in my teenage years, and up till today, of course. And as a visual artist, I look at Wuxia and Jianghu, or rather the films, the Wuxia films, not only as a form of entertainment, but also as a rich resource to contemplate ideas of identity and belonging. I started exploring into Wuxia in 2013, and it was through a live art installation that I titled 1.5. The work was part of a group show titled Displacements, and it was presented in a 70-odd-year-old house that was soon to be demolished. The work drew from the iconic Shaw Brothers film, The One-Armed Swordsman. I was very compelled by the embodied incompleteness of the main character in the film, who nevertheless used that incompleteness to his advantage as a source of production, if you like, by wielding a broken blade that he had inherited from his dead father, and acquiring an unorthodox sword technique from a half-torn manual with only one arm that was severed in a fight. So across this exhibition period, I used my non-master arm to mark on a piece of paper, and I gradually extended the length of the stylus to increasingly pronounce my distance between me and the paper. In 2018, I continued this exploration into Wuxia through another installation at an independent platform called Islands Peninsula And it was a place that was then located within an interstitial space between Peninsula Plaza and Excelsior Hotel, which I found to be perfect to explore this kind of unlocated geography of Jianghu. I had deliberately used Kang Ouw instead of Jianghu as the title to the show to reference a term which was popularized in the 70s and 80s by Indonesia's Jin Yong, if you like, an Wuxia writer named Kang Ouw, who had authored more than 100 Wuxia series, despite not knowing the single Chinese word, and who incidentally had lived and worked very near my childhood house in Solo City. In fact, my uncle recounted a story to me of how he would sometimes be able to hear the sound of Kang Ouw's typewriter, or was it the sound of his small printing press as he walked through the small kampong lane that Kang Ouw was based in at the time. The installation at Islands Peninsula was made up of large photocopied prints of hand tracings from various Wuxia film stills. I was extremely interested in the tracing method, as it was a very tactile way to look at a source image. A method that combined touching and seeing together, so to speak. And in a metaphorical sense, it also reflects how I perceive Jianghu or Wuxia as a kind of diasporic cultural tracing of an imagined yet disconnected ancestral past and land. Since the 2018 installation at Islands Peninsula, tracing continued to evolve as an important idea that I explore in my Kang Ouw series. For example, in the tunnel exhibition, tracing entails transposing ideas across various media and to shift between different modes of artistic methods and sensorial outcomes, even as the same source material was used repeatedly as departure points. The exhibition is made up of a number of works, some of which I am going to highlight here. At the two ends of the tunnel are banners with numbers on them that are expressed in a digital font that I had designed. The font was used during the Song and Yuan dynasty, and it was called the Ninefold Script, or 九叠传. The script was particularly interesting for me because I read that it could have influenced the development of the square Kufic architectural script during the Ilkhanate Persia, or modern-day Iran, near the western border of China. And it was this transcultural, transdisciplinary moment that was particularly fascinating for me. In this series of banners, I had also used the numeral font to encode Li Bai's poem, 侠客行, that was featured in Jin Yong's novel of the same title, using the Chinese telegraphic code, a system of assigning unique 4-digit numbers to every Chinese character. The method expresses a sense of distance, a vast gap, a psychological historical and cultural one that I sensed being a Singapore-based and Indonesian-born Chinese when I read the poem. And it was a gap that I had read the historian Kang Ouw acknowledged when he had tried reading Western modern literature without the necessary deep foundation in the Western classics. This is the poem's title, Xia Ke Xing, as encoded in the numeral font. If I remember correctly, it should read from left to right, 0204 1356 4887. In the middle of the tunnel is a 4-channel video work titled Jianghu Wuxia. The video is generated using a piece of algorithm, a computer software. Hence, the footages appear without a fixed sequence. The footages were made using film stills of King Hu's Dragon Inn, and also of its remake by Xu Ke and Raymond Lee. The work analyzes the nebulous form of Jianghu by proposing that Jianghu can be perceived and read as a kind of transcultural collage of images and sounds, and in this case, images of text, landscapes, action, and drama. Here is a short clip of the video installation. The soundtrack to this video work is also algorithmically generated, and it plays gamelan sounds that encode Li Bai's poem in Morse code. The next work that I'll be sharing about is the one on the Esplanade side of the tunnel. The work is titled Can Dao, or Broken Blade, and it is an installation of 99 unique hand-traced images of the same film still from the 1967 Shaw Brothers film, The One-Armed Swordsman. The film still that I was very much drawn towards was of the character, the main character, raising his sword arm before he strikes. It is a bodily gesture that recurs again and again in the film, and which in my mind embodied the incompleteness of the character in every sense, from his missing arm, the broken blade that he wields, and the half-tone manual that he acquired his technique from. And yet at the same time, that gesture was executed with such power and energy that it signals to me triumph over absence and loss, which is a mesmerizing quality for me. Here is another installation of the work and a detailed view. One last work before I close my sharing. And this is a work that, in a sense, served as a precursor to Can Dao. This is a video work that was commissioned by Plural Art and NAC 2 years ago during the 2-month long lockdown, when each day was obviously different yet felt strangely the same. It is a flipbook of the same image, traced differently each time, paired with lyrics of a heartbreak song. It was meant to be a soundless music video that spoke of partings and perhaps a longing for brighter days to come. Thank you. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Boedi, for the sharing. And I think Stephen's presentation, right before your sharing, I think it also elucidated a lot of thoughts on the way that you've also interpreted Wuxia and the imagery, and created something, your artworks based on I guess some of the philosophies of Wuxia and some themes, but also I guess capturing that kind of abstracted hybridity from your own personal experience, which it's always been very fascinating. Yeah, I mean, we have around about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes for some questions and answers. So I think we have one from Johnson. So who's asking if you could share any thoughts between Xia and the artist Jianghu and art world.
Yeah. I wish there is a film about the art world titled Jianghu that I can draw a reference from. But I guess it is very tempting to compare the Xia with the artist, because I think there's a kind of calling, if you like, for artists to be members of a community, a public community that are able to speak out for those who can't speak for themselves, who do not have a voice, who, in a sense, stand up against forces that are unjust, and so forth, like how public intellectuals at times are called to do. I don't know. I mean, I certainly do not think about the role of the xiake to apply to myself. I think it takes a lot of courage and strength, but I think it is a admirable kind of a calling to try to fulfill. But as how Dr. Teo had described Wuxia and Jianghu, the code of honor is it can be I guess quite problematic in when one operates from the city rather than the Jianghu. When you place the character of the Xia in the city, how does one navigate through these structures and systems without turning into a vigilante, and doing whatever one deems to be right. This is if one is serious about engaging with the society and the community and people, I think that there needs to be a greater consideration in how certain ethos or certain objectives or aspirations as held by the Xiake maybe can be achieved through not through force, but through the artistic gesture of literature, visual arts, performance, and so forth. I think this this is not a very easy question. So I'm trying my best here.
Yeah, you answered it really well. I mean, Stephen, if you might want to elaborate on that, but I mean, maybe in looking at it in terms of the film world, I mean, please feel free to. Yeah.
The Xia, at least in the cinematic Xia, is an artist. Because he should be able to. I mean, I don't know whether the real Xia are expected to do this, but the cinematic Xia anyway should be able to compose poetry, for example, and sing songs, and quote the best poets, and even to draw paintings, things like that, or calligraphy. He should be a good calligrapher, and he should know history. He should know history, or at least the legacy of the historical Xia. The things that Xia have done throughout the ages, and he should be romantic as well. If the Xia is not romantic, it is almost not a Xia. And you could see this actually in literature as well, of course, in the books of the novels of Jin Yong and many others. That the Xia is almost, always invariably a romantic kind of figure, who falls in love and who falls in love with causes and things like that. But above all, the Xia is an artist in the martial arts. He should be able to fight like an artist, and that is the connection here between art and the Xia. And by the way, may I just make a comment about Boedi's exhibition, because I've actually gone to see the exhibition at the tunnel, the Esplanade Tunnel, and I just want to make this comment. when I entered the tunnel, and I think he's kind of staged it or arranged it in such a way that when you enter the tunnel and then you look at the exhibits, you look at the works, you are as if immersed in the Jianghu, the Kang Ouw, Jianghu itself, and that should be the idea, of course, of Kang Ouw, right? I don't know whether this is the intention of Boedi, but at least this is my impression. So as I walk through the tunnel, I am like immersed in the Jianghu.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, it was. It's such a generous compliment because yes, it was indeed my intent to bring the viewer into the world of Jianghu and Wuxia through the exhibition. So I'm really happy to hear that you were able to feel the space as something that you could associate with Jianghu. Thank you.
Yeah, if anyone has any further questions, I mean, you can, I think we have time for one final question. So if you'd like to type that into the chat box, please feel free. Any last questions that you might want to ask Dr. Teo or Boedi? I actually, maybe I can, feel before, as people are thinking of their questions, I did have a question for Dr. Teo. I mean, during your presentation earlier, you mentioned about the Xia figure being without gender, and I guess in the martial arts, I mean, it's generally known to be dominated by men, and I know that Wuxia films also have these feminine knight errant figures. So I thought if you could share which films we really see these feminine knight errant figures, and also I guess what maybe was the reception of such kind of characters by audiences who were watching these films at the time.
Well, the word itself, xia, the Chinese word itself, xia, is free of gender. It is free of gender. It doesn't indicate whether it is a male xia or a female xia. So if you are a xia, you can be male, you can be female, you can even be transgender. And there are transgender xias, by the way. So the word itself is free of gender, and we should realize that from the outset. Although if you want to specify, if you actually want to specify whether a xia is female or female, then of course you specify. So for example, if it is a female xia, you say 女xia, right? 女xia, or 男xia is a male xia, right? But a 女xia is commonly used, of course, to refer to a female xia. And I think it is used in that case because in most people's minds, the xia is a male. The xia is supposed to be male, but actually throughout history, I suppose that may be the case. But at least beginning from the Tang Dynasty onwards, there is a tradition of female xia. Female xia emerging actually even before the Tang Dynasty already. So it's not a strange thing to think of the xia or all these stories of xia featuring not just men, not just male xia, but female xia as well. And of course, of late, you see a lot of films always featuring one or two female xia. And in fact, the focus of the films may in fact be on the female xia, like, for example, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which is surely one of the films about, one of the better films about female xia. But one of the, before that, I would say there was King Hu's Well Dragon Inn had a female xia, but then King Hu went on to make Xia Nu, if you recall that film, A Touch of Zen, which I actually wrote about. I wrote a book about. And Xianyu was one of the first, I suppose, films. Well, that's not truly accurate. Actually, not one of the first. In fact, one of those master works in that period in the 60s and 70s, which had a female Xia. And of course, the film was very famous by King Ouw. It won an award at the Cannes Film Festival. And from then on, it kind of established this fashion, if you like, of female Xia. So it's not strange at all. It's not strange at all. And actually, in recent times, one of the great female Xia films is, of course, Hou Xiaoxian's The Assassin, right? Featuring a female assassin. So, but there are movies. If there's one movie that does not have a female Xia nowadays, I would be very surprised.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for for providing context to my question also. Thank you very much. So we just have maybe two last questions. One from Audrey, she's wondering what's your favorite Wuxia film and why. And the last question that we'll take today is were Wuxia stories featured in operas before Jing Yong's novels and Shaw movies, and which were the famous Wuxia stories for operas?
Well, my favorite Wuxia film, I don't have one favorite, actually. I have a lot of favorites. But I suppose if you were to force me with a gun on my head, what is your favorite, I would say The Golden Swallow by Zhang Che, starring Zheng Peipei and Wang Yu, released in 1968, I think. Yeah. That would be, if you were to really force me to say what is my favorite Wuxia film, I would say The Golden Swallow. But I have lots of favorites. And all the films of King Ouw, all the Wuxia films of King Ouw are truly wonderful, wonderful films. And if you were to ask me what is the one Wuxia film by King Ouw, well, I would say maybe A Touch of Zen. But I also love things like The Fate of Li Kan and The Valiant Ones, Raining in the Mountain. I mean, these are wonderful. I mean, you cannot do without this kind of movies if you are a Wuxia student or a Wuxia scholar, or even a fan, simply a fan of Wuxia. You simply have to watch the films of King Ouw. Now, as for Wuxia films, Wuxia stories featured in operas before Jin Yong's novels, yeah, sure. In fact, before Shaw movies, of course. In fact, if you're all conversant with Beijing opera and even other regional forms of opera, there are a lot of Wuxia stories. And one of the most famous is the female generals of the Yang family, which is a very famous opera, as well as a film. I think there was a film made of it. In fact, an opera film made of the opera itself. That is to say, it is actually an opera film, which is a great genre too, by the way. And a lot of opera films are actually Wuxia stories as well.
Thinking about the opera and the Wuxia. I mean, if there are no final questions from members of the audience, I'll proceed to close today's session. And on behalf of Dr. Teo and Boedi, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us this evening and for also sharing this space with us. For those who have not seen the exhibition Kang Ouw, it runs until the 1st of May 2022. And we also have some exhibition tours planned in March and April. So if you're keen to sign up, please keep a lookout for more information on the Esplanade website. And this information will be published very soon. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.